Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Season 3 of My Hero Academia. So, ultimately, if you guys don't know, if you don't know this show at all, if you don't know My Hero Academia at all, luckily for you, I was able to go through and review the very first and second season. So, ultimately, if you haven't seen those reviews yet, if you're not aware of what this show is at all, by and large, go ahead and go into, I'm going to create a My Hero Academia playlist, and you guys can review every season of this individually. Well, the first two seasons are kind of done in one video, but I try to like break down. I try to really break down if people have never seen the show, the first season, the second season, stuff like that. There was some stuff that I probably got a little jumbled, especially in the when I talk about the first season. There might have been some things here and there that I didn't all together remember for the first season because, like, after watching a huge span of this show, there's some stuff that, like, looking back on it, like, I think season three kind of helps me kind of remember some of the early stuff if I had forgotten some of it at some points. But yeah, what is my review about season three? Ultimately, I'm going to break this down in a very cryptic like sense, then give you a double 5 time count, and then go into spoilers about this season. This season had 64 episodes, and I'm amazed that I kind of really bashed through it as quickly as I did because man, this is a daunting task. But then when looking at it, I'm like, but I really want it. I can't really just stop watching this show now. It's weird. It's like I really love the superhero genre, and I also just really I'm trying to find something that is one superhero like, and two is just grabbing me enough uh, to be one superhero like and two anime. Like there's only this combination of My Hero Academia and everything else. I can't quite get myself to really enjoy anything else quite yet. To ultimately just go and say, hey, yeah, um, like I like one thing that I would really enjoy is if they eventually had Samurai Flamingo or whatever it's called, Flamenco, yeah, Samurai Flamenco. Man, I wish that would eventually get a English dubbed over version of it, but it probably never will. Just because it's not as heavily popular as other things, but man, I wish that anime would get English dubbed. But mood point. So, but I could also just kind of go back and just rewatch Tiger and Bunny again and enjoy that as well. So, anyways, the third season of My Hero Academia, honestly, to me, feels like, even though it's a very large season, it honestly feels like a bulk of this season really feels like filler for most of it. Um, yeah, I really enjoy the aspect of them actually getting to the point of these characters actually seemingly getting close to legitimately becoming pro heroes. But it's like, man, it seems like the tests never end. It seems like the tests never end. The approach of this just like constant thing of you would think that it's kind of weird that nobody would be able to you would think that no one why isn't that anybody hasn't skyrocketed and been this super uber genius person that skipped a couple of these grades or something like that, like a Sheldon or something like that. I guess it just doesn't quite work for the quirks of the Hero Academia. No, you always have to learn things. Um, going into this, I really because man, like this is gonna like what is it gonna be like the Hogwarts years of My Hero Academia, where it takes you like 9 years to legitimately just become a pro hero, and you don't have to do any more schooling, and then you could just like man by the time people actually graduate from this school, they're going to be so beaten down from years and years and years of just battling and whatever that like by the time that they actually become a hero, they might as well just like retire like All Might does. Like they might as well just retire like All Might. And this and that. As soon as they get out of the school, they might as well just retire because like, hey, yeah, I'm a pro hero now. I guess I should just retire. Because how exactly like I understand why like one of the heroes in the other season like she just becomes a model because it's like yeah like it makes sense because yeah why batter your body like because basically after once you get into the school it's like you're eventually just gonna have somebody come in and take your powers away from you or you're going to start losing your powers or your powers aren't going to be as good as they were and this and that and like um it's interesting and or weird. So yeah, this season has much more like I would say filler in this season. There's a lot of times where it kind of has to reintroduce you to the product, especially in the very first episode. It kind of feels like that whole entire episode of the very first episode of season 3 ultimately feels like something you could 100% skip and just go to the episode after that because like the the episode 1 of season 3 is basically like hey if anybody hasn't seen this product yet here's what it is. So a lot of times it's kind of like that. It's kind of reflecting on their past at some point or it's just kind of like we get kind of back to them kind of really still having to do these tests to eventually determine whether or not they're really legitimately going to be qualified to be heroes. And there's some people who you would think, oh yeah, this character is just going to blaze all through this whole thing and like beat this test, and sadly they don't. But there's also some people that I think deserve to not also go through the tests as well. Like uh, there's definitely a big fat reason why there's some characters that ultimately just I don't think will ever really become a hero because of just how they are just like so ultimately we do have some additions to this season that come at the very uh like additions to the season, but ultimately like there's kind of some additions of characters, but it's kind of sporadically to help you understand story and stuff like that. Um, but anyways, we man, the season was so long. It's hard to really like keep everything entangled and twined and this and that and remember what all happened in this season. Hope it's not from some previous season because that's what happens when you bash all this stuff out in one time after the other. Like, did that happen in the third season? Did that happen? Recently, this entire season really crux on like the summer adventure. Really, you have kind of this like summer getaway, but it ends up just being like kind of like summer school to a lot of these kids. And what ends up being something that they think, oh, they're going to have the time of their lives, it's going to be such a fun thing. They end up by the end of all this being much more hurt than they were um, that they were thinking. So consistently it seems like Eraser is really drilling into these kids and really just like he's really working them so hard, like unbelievably hard that like basically people, and funny enough, people are going to take these kids basically like for like as pushovers, or they're all thinking that like, dude, this is gonna be a freaking breeze to take these people out, like psh, no problem. But it ends up that it's like, no, like this class, this one class has like way too much experience that no one else gets to have, and then also like realistically they they're overworked compared to everyone else. uh going into this season, like I was just like, man, this is pretty awesome. Like there's some stuff that like, God, I hate all the filler stuff, but man, is there kind of some very interesting scenes where you actually get to see the main character um, actually get to really fully fledgedly use some of his powers, but then realize like I think I really had to use that power under severe like emergency or duress or whatever. So it's finally great to see the main character, which I completely forgot his name already. Um, uh, Izuke, probably wrong. But anyways, um, we have to where the main character ultimately through this season, it's very much an entire season of sometimes where there's times where he shouldn't use his power, or there's times when he should try to come up with some kind of strategy instead of just like going in there, fists or legs or body or head or whatever, guns blazing, I guess. Uh, Taking his entire body in there and just flinging it at somebody, and like that's not how he should approach everything. Um, to the point where they have to have an entire episode about them like thinking about what happened, instead of just kind of going in there and just kind of powering your way through everything. Reasonably, I think that this kind of like this season kind of like slowed out just because like all the thinking, all the strategizing, all of the like, hey, let's showcase this, like let's slow this down and let's take an entire episode to showcase these one people. And then in the next episode we're gonna have them fight the classroom and ooh yeah. Like that's it's kind of the whole thing. But anyways, we eventually have to see our characters, if they've already been battered and beaten and bruised and exhausted, what happens like when they still have to go that extra mile, because something happens, like horrible things go awry. And if you're completely like exhausted but you have to fight for your life, what is going to happen? um, and again, most of the time people have to think their way out. But I also like so much more that this class is just really just so much more than just like everybody like fending for themselves. Like when in the very early seasons, like you get all these people that are just like I'm here for me, I'm out to be number one, like, and kind of like the second season was almost kind of like that as well. um for like some of the competitions, like smaller groups of people were kind of mixed together, but a lot of times like everybody was like smaller grouped for themselves, uh to where in now in this season, like we have an entire class that are all like banding together and are all really just like, we are going to help everyone, we are not going to have one person left behind. Like we are going to make it so we're going to come back for that person and help them because that's just what we do. Like that's the great thing about this season is it really like it becomes more than just kind of like teamwork. Where like in the very first season, everybody was individuals. In the second season, people were doing teamwork. But now, like really, it's just this season is much more about like, hey, we're all heroes and like we're sticking together. Like if it isn't like how like Justice League, where for example like Justice League, like everybody would kind of do their own thing. Like Batman would do his way, and Superman would punch through things, and blah 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 blah. Green Lantern would throw a ring on people, and blah 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 blah. Where when they actually cementingly realize that it's like, oh hey, like yeah, like we're in this team, but we're not really working together. And so then you got like the people that are kind of um, like we have Superman calling the shots, and it's like, hey, Green Lantern and Flash, you go here, and Hawk Girl and Wonder Woman, you go here, and Batman and me will go here, and this and that, and Aquaman and Martian Manhunter or Cyborg or whatever, you go here, and like that's teamwork technically, like to do what other people are telling you, and then eventually you get these big, huge events where the entire team is fighting this onslaught of a gigantic alien force all together and Justice League United, woo! Anyways, but yeah, that's how like eventually like I see this becoming where it's like all heroes going up against all villains, and like I think that's where we're gonna eventually see um, this thing heading. The only thing is, like, the only thing that I like besides the filler of this season, which happens, reasonably within this show, I wish that we could have actually went somewhere with this season. I wish that they could have had uh, times to actually patrol more. Like, we got a little hint of that, but like I wish that we would have actually gone back to that, like legitimately, like had people like been doing things on the street more, rather than where they end up going in this season. Like I actually liked the whole point when they actually took down some people in streets. Like it actually was really enjoyable to like since they have all the kids where they have them in this season, or where they kind of have eventually the kids in the season, like you would think would just be an easy thing to like start knocking on people's doors and just say, hey, like come out here and let's do some practice drills and stuff like that, and just uh, yeah. Recently, I just don't quite understand exactly what these kids are actually like learning in the school, besides like every class is like PE or whatever, but like, are they having to learn normal school stuff like trigonometry and all this other math stuff as well, like English class and this and that, or are they learning like a different kind of branch of school learning? I don't know. That's the whole thing. It's like, man, could you imagine like getting beaten the crap out of for hours on end, and then having to come into a class where it's like, yeah, let's read chapters 4 through 6, and it's like, it's just like you'd be freaking exhausted. Um, but anyways, going into this season, yeah, it's there's some good things that approach within the main character, of course. Deku, there we go. I was like, God, what is his freaking name? Ultimately, he very much has to rely on people in this season, much more than I think he ever did in seasons past. He really has to ask people instead of just like coming up with some answers himself. Like there are some times where he like has those light bulb moments, but a lot of times he has to ask people for help, which I think is fun. Going on to this, like, why, like, if we're adding so many freaking characters in this show, why not have people learn? Why not have people try and pick off some people that it's like, you know what, I really liked that like move that you did. Like, how exactly did you do that? Like, there's a lot of people that seem to be actually asking like how people are doing things, or like it seems to be that there's some characters that seem at some point to have improvements and this and that going on with some characters, and you get to see that eventually come back up. So anyways, that's probably overall what all I want to go into about this review of this season. I still like, even though again, I'm hoping that season 4 isn't like filler filled. I'm hoping that reasonably we get down to some real business. We get down to some real, eventually people coming close to becoming um, pros at this point, and ultimately I really liked that finally in this season we got some costume adjustments, which was great. We also got a very odd character by the very end of the season. This very goofball Esh like character that I thought was funny. But anyways, let's go on to spoilers. Ultimately, you can ultimately see that I still, even though there's again filler, um, there it still was a pretty good overall kind of approach and good season for me ultimately. So still, it seems like they did kind of give All Might like a thing to do in this season, but like they again like are kind of much more like tapering him off. Like they're really just like having his like they're kind of having him more as like emotional support rather than actually being a person that is um going to be there to really bring in the stories or anything like that a lot of times. There was one episode that I was kind of confused about All Might about, where it's like, okay, how is it that All Might is doing this and being a part of this, and how is it that All Might is still doing what he's doing, even though supposedly his power is what it is in this season? I don't quite understand that, or I just don't quite understand like how exactly it's still like All Might is still being um, who he is in this season. So, and trying to say it as cryptically as possible because I don't want to give people anything away and just be like, he spoiled this for me. So let's go into this and let's give you spoilers. So let's go out of our way to double five this. Ultimately, yeah, it's a long freaking season. I know a lot of people just kind of give up or just kind of be like annoyed about a lot of the filler points, a lot of the points where I'm like, where I'm sure a lot of people are just, God, get to the point already. Like, I think that season 3 kind of is like that. Is like, just get to the point. Just give me something interesting to really watch, and this and that in this season, because that's what it feels like this season is. So, spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil the season. I still like it, even though like this season just kind of like kind of because I don't really like the whole summer vacation kind of approach to this season. Like begrudgingly, the very first thing is them like trying to just like all the girls and the gals are all like swimming in a pool, and they use their quirks to try to beat one another at swimming in a pool. That was such a dumb season. And then they have to kind of rehash like every single quirk that everyone has and every single power that everyone has and every single nuance about them and this and that and just ooh ah, which I thought was dumb. So the whole thing of this season is we have all of these kids that are ultimately going to this like summer-esh like camp to really just work on their powers, kind of consistently try to ultimately make them realize that, like, yeah, like, up until now, we've kind of really made you, like, adjust your power. We're trying to, like, have you to be, like think about your power and how to best use it in situations, like what you have, and how you can kind of work on that and kind of really master and be able to use this in like the best situations by using your brain. In this portion, Eraser wants to teach these kids how to take their quirk and make a like ultimate use of it, meaning to make their quirk stronger and how to be able to make their how to make their power like much more powerful than it was. Like going from like say for example Deku, like him going from like 5% to maybe at some point higher. At some point. We'll get there. We'll get there. So ultimately we have like all like this huge montage of all these, every single one of these characters. We have to show every single class member being able in a gigantic montage, all being able to like, oh, here's how this person is going to better use their power. They're gonna eat a lot more sugar, and oh, this character, she's gonna eat too because ultimately she can pop out a lot more materials by eating a lot more. Who would have thought? And um, we have everybody like showcasing how they're gonna betterment their powers and this and that, and like how like everybody's doing these like sweating with the oldies like exercises. It's freaking weird, to try to like betterment their powers. It's odd, but anyways, so we have these kids that are trying to better their power. Like everyone, they're trying to realize like how they could take this power and push it to the limit, or also ultimately figure out some way to come up with some ultimate move. So all the while, we actually have villains that are going to approach this said camp because they want revenge on Stain's character. They also want to collect some of the kids who feel that they are being um, like a villain in training kind of thing. That ultimately uh, they could be a villain at some point, if they're just kind of pushed the right way, or they're said the right thing, or this and that. So we ultimately have the villains approach this camp, and pretty much every single one of these students are all pretty much like blown out. They're all freaking exhausted, and they're all sleeping, and they're just like, oh my god, this is awful. And villains show up. Deku goes and meets with the kid with the horned hat, just to kind of get his backstory, because ultimately, supposedly, his parents were heroes and they were murdered by some other guy with a quirk. And because he hates all the heroes, and like he calls them frauds and this and that, and he hates all of them, he hits some of the heroes in the junk and walks away because he hates all of them because they're stupid. Um, all the while, we have all these other heroes that are just like kind of like these pussycat doll like characters that are all like cats, and it's freaking weird. And they're all like training these kids and how to like better their power and this and that, and how to figure them out. So Deku is with this kid, and he's ultimately trying to like get to know this kid's story, like it seems like he's like gonna invest in this kid because it's like, why is this kid just so stubborn and compared to everybody else? Like everybody else is so easygoing besides this one kid. I want to figure out why. So goes with the kid, finds out his backstory, but then it seems like he also finds out that there's a villain's approaching. And seemingly, this villain that is approaching them is a villain that his power is that his muscles are so like he's basically called muscles because realistically, like his muscles are so huge that his skin cannot hold them. And so ultimately you just see like this like these muscles like basically imagine if you were to tear off skin from an arm and like an Attack on Titan kind of thing. This guy has his muscles showing off from the outside of his skin because his muscles are so big that his skin can't contain it. And this guy is going to ultimately fight Deku, who has, of course, the power of All for One, the All Might power. Again, I will probably get All for One or One for All or whatever freaking confused during this review. I ultimately will just keep saying All Might's power because that's what happens. The transfer of All Might's power. So, because a lot of time, because like All for One also means a person, and it also means like that's the thing that I left off in the season 1 and 2 review that like All for One, which is a villain in this story, is very much like we get his backstory in season 2, but we actually get to see him in this season. And All for One, I believe, is the what the villain's called. There's so much confusion because that's what happens when you have like they should have clearly stated like the power that All Might is giving this character is like All for One, and the villain's name is One for All because technically he's like this guy is like giving powers to people, but he's only giving one of them, or sometimes he's giving multiple of them at some point in time. But anyways, it's just kind of really confusing. Anyways, we get to a point where all of these villains are kind of all bashing in, and all the heroes are all caught off guard, and really they kind of do some rash or like decisions that they ultimately regret, just because they didn't know any better or they couldn't figure out how to come up with the right answers or something like that. Funny how like some of the heroes are honestly kind of very much like they can't use their own powers in this scenario because of course like there's certain characters in a forest that they can't use their powers, otherwise they'll like burn the entire forest down or this and that. But of course you have half hot half cold kind of person that only can use his ice powers to try to beat people and this and that. Anyways, we get some interesting barrage of villains that I think are kind of like their quirks are very creative. We have one kind of like Worm Ash looking character that like has like these like I would call them like fork like things coming out of his teeth. Like this like fork like metal thing coming out of his like teeth, and I'm like, man, this looks really interesting. I'm very fascinated about this character, just the approach to this character, but he looks just freaking like very much Hellraiser like. I think that's where they were going with that character. But anyways, we eventually have some like characters that you would probably think would best these villains. Ultimately, they get freaking clocked. Like some of the big actual heroes, like the pro heroes, get freaking clocked. They get caught off guard, and then it just kind of gets to the point where like people are start like you have Deku who ultimately not only crazily uses his power against this unbeatable force. Um, he ultimately like completely loses all use of his arms, and because ultimately he is taking all for one, or he's taking all for one, his power, and he's taking it times a million, and like punching this guy named Muscle, this guy with the muscle quirk, and freaking just like takes him out. I'm like, oh my god, this is freaking crazy, because like he's only usually known for doing like 5% of this power, but now he's taking it to 1 million, because like all the numbers before that just didn't do. Like, because a lot of time the muscle character would just laugh at him like, ha ha ha, like really, you're gonna put that weak stuff against me? Like, come on. So this kid ultimately, once he finally takes down Muscle, I call him Muscle, he eventually just runs around freaking everywhere with his arms just hanging off to his side, but he's running everywhere trying to let people know what's going on. Like, he's the guy that's basically like, the British are coming, to a lot of people. Like, he's ultimately like the warning sign to say, hey, like, you have telepathy, like, you need to warn people what's going on, and like, you need to contact people and let them know things are going on. Like, and he's running freaking everywhere. He's ultimately trying to connect with some of his friends, and his friends are just like, oh my god, you look awful. It's like, yeah, like, I just got in a fight with one of these villains, and yeah, my arms are dead. So it's kind of getting to the point where they're kind of very concerned about Deku, because they're like, God, this guy is going to pass out at any moment. And like, he's more than anything, like, he's just there for really just moral support, because really one of the other kind of guys with the kind of bizarrish extension, like winged weird quirk thing, like, he scoops him up and just kind of like backpacks him the entire time, and um, and then they're just kind of like running around trying to figure out where to freaking go to get to people. And like, funny enough, like, the guy that he was with, the guy that consistently wears the mask, was with um, the guy with the bird freaking shadow and the bird face. Ultimately, like, we saw in the very first season where like he can't use his power at night. Sadly enough, he had to, because it like was just a like, he forcibly had to. But then his power goes ragingly out of control. Luckily enough, like, we find out that his power is fire, so we ultimately have to like kind of push like to do two missions in one. Um, we have to push this shadow, this bird creature, to get to the two boys where their superpower is to ultimately use fire, to use light against this bird to ultimately keep it controlled. Ultimately, yeah, to eventually kind of get more people together. The ultimate goal of the villains is ultimately mostly is kind of to seek revenge for Stain, but the real ultimate kind of pickup is just to get one hero, which I thought was dumb. I'm like, so they really just came to this camp to maybe kill all the heroes, but then just to collect one hero to ultimately just. But I guess it's also to send a message that it's like, hey, like, your kids are not safe. Like, hey, maybe you should pull them out of this school because they're not safe. Like, the heroes aren't keeping them safe. The pro heroes aren't keeping them safe. But anyways, we get to the aspect of now. Pretty much like all the heroes are kind of collecting themselves, and And now the whole like point of this is to just kind of okay collect our numbers back up and try to deck whoever's villains are left. Uh, but eventually, like it gets to the point where there's one character with one quirk that seems to like put people in freaking marble balls, and like he is a very like elusive character. He has all these like freaking jumping quirks, or like he can jump from anywhere. Like it seems like he is very much like an escapist. Um, and like he's very much like I would say that his quirk is like being a magician, it seems like. Anyways, so we ultimately have the one kid that they were trying to keep safe ultimately ends up being placed in one of these marbles, and then eventually like basically mission complete for the villains. Like yeah, they didn't kill all the heroes, but you know what, like they'll just kind of take what they can get. um and this and that, because the heroes are ultimately kind of like having their rally cry and getting everybody up. But then there's a whole entire section of students that are just kind of like stuck into this classroom and held up by one of the teachers telling them that it's like, hey, like, um, everybody's like, I want to use my powers to go out there and help people. And the teacher is just like, no, like, we don't know who exactly they're here to try to collect, which you would think if we have one guy with a quirk to teleport in anywhere. Like you would think that ultimately it would be a moot point to keep everybody in one room, um, regardless. Like you would think that like why not just like go out there and help and like freaking just count the numbers afterwards. Like if the whole entire crux was to collect everybody, then again, like eventually you're going to get those people back and this and that, like kind of really like. But I guess that's just me. Maybe someone would be assessing something differently. But anyways, the heroes get what they go for, and it gets to the aspect of like all these kids are really freaking hurt, and so they want to go and collect their friend from the villains, but ultimately they don't, like they can't use their powers because they're all like heroes in training, so they ultimately can't actually use their characters against villains in public, which I think is a stupid thing. So it's like what? So if it's not sanctioned by the school, it's kind of like Hogwarts. You can't use your magic outside school and stuff like excuse me and stuff like that. I think this is kind of just like why police these people so much. Like if they're like, you would think if their life seems to be in jeopardy a lot, you would think that you would cut them some friggin' slack. But I guess it's just like, well, yeah, but what about property damage, and like what about like that's the smart thing about the one part where uh, All Might goes up against Deku and the kid that explodes, and ultimately they try to minimize property damage by having All Might fight them where he's already kind of destroyed some of the property in the city. I was like, man, that's brilliant. Like, yeah, that's actually smart. But anyways, we get to the aspect of these kids are all going to go and find their fallen student and try to get him, but do that without using any power because they can't. Because legally they would be deemed either villains, or they would probably be kicked out of the school, or this and that, disciplinary actions, blah 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 blah. So it ends up that these students end up finding where this like villain base is. I guess luckily enough for them, um, they end up tracking down these villains because they leave a tracker on them. Because the girl that can create stuff created a tracker. What a brilliant idea. Um, So they track them down, and ultimately they're just kind of looking through windows. They're not going to do anything just yet. And bam, all the heroes kind of like smash through a wall, and they all, the pro heroes, are all coming in, and they're like throwing cuffs on everybody, and they're like, yeah, like we got you, ha ha ha, sucks to be you. All the while, the student hero that consistently explodes, he was the one that got caught. That does the explosions. He got caught by the villains to kind of brainwash him and try to go into their side, but he was never going to give up, and he was never not going to just give in to being a villain. That's just who he is, and that's what I appreciate about him. But then I also just find this guy like, man, it must be like such a tough thing for the guy that has to do this person's voice, just consistently yelling all of the time. Like this character has to yell all the time. So it's just like, man, hopefully this person probably has a very good like experience for consistently yelling. Or maybe it's just like something that like, oh no, it's actually much easier than you would think. Um, or maybe he has to get like warmed up doing that voice. But good God, like all the yelling that he has to do, it's like good God, like it's like you're a moron and it's like good God, man, just like probably doing that for who knows how long, like maybe like 8 hours a day, if not 8 hours or more than that, probably twice that amount. Good God, just screaming at the top of your lungs, especially if people want you to do that, how many numerous takes over until they like it. Good God, just a god awful experience. But I'm sure a lot of anime have to do that all the time. I'm sure a lot of people would mention that, like, they, at one point, they freaking, like coughed up like freaking blood while they were doing their anime voices just because of how strenuous some of the stuff that they have to do is, or how many repetitive like things that they have to do, how many times they have to yell something, or how many times they have to scream and this and that. But anyways, mood point. So All Might eventually goes, and of course he's like the first guy in the scene, and I'm like, oh my god, like All Might, like dude, this guy is really overly extending himself like all the freaking time. Like I'm waiting for this guy to eventually just run out of juice, and and this is that moment. We ultimately have All Might meeting his sensei, his predecessor, his teacher that ultimately had given him the power of All for One. We ultimately meet the villainous All for One, the guy that otherwise looks very much like a Darth Vader esque like character in his suit. That ultimately has seemingly the like every like a ton, a slew of just every single power imaginable. But there's sometimes where like his powers are kind of like all over the place, but like there's certain people that can do certain powers better than he can at some points, and this and that. But anyways, we have this big, huge brawl out where ultimately All Might is gonna have to fight his teacher, but the student is there. Like so, ultimately, All Might is trying to like at first like kind of pull his punches because it's like, dude, I don't want to make too much impact to hurt my student while I'm trying to fight my teacher. But luckily enough, the students demise to using all their powers together to combine all their powers and do this kind of like this shot out like thing where they like use all their powers to combine to have it to where they shoot into the air and have like the student use his explosive powers to shoot out and for someone to grab him, and then they fly high enough to where ultimately none of the villains could reach him high enough, and so ultimately they do this thing where ultimately like they grab the student and then get freaking out of there as quickly as possible. And All Might sees this and he's like, "Wow! Like they took it upon themselves to just do this. Like I'm gonna teach them a lesson after this. Like they shouldn't have done this, but I appreciate it." And so All Might freaking has all the lineage to just start beating the living crap out of his predecessor that gave him this power. All the while, like we get a backstory of All Might and how he had like who was the person that gave this power to him. This woman that gave because ultimately, yeah, like she gave the power to him and this and that, and like there's a whole exchange about ultimately that his predecessor that gave him this power, this woman, because evidently she got it from somewhere. She must have got it from him. Um, Ultimately, like All Might finds out that this woman had a son that never went to be in this school, and ultimately it ends up being the kid with the hand on his face. And it's like, oh my god, that is the reason why this kid became a villain, just because, and that's why he hates All Might so much, is simply because like nobody came for him from this school to ultimately take care of him, and they should have, because once his mother died, no one took care of him. Anyway, but All for One did, the villain did, and came to him and came to the kid with the hand on his face and ultimately just took care of him and freaking apprenticed him to be a villain. So we ultimately have it to where, again, All Might freaking decks this villain and takes him down. The only problem is he uses all of his power, supposedly, but it seems like you get glimpses of it here and there and this and that, and I'm just like, okay, that makes no sense. Like his power should be Dunzo, but like his power keeps popping up consistently for like short amounts of time, which doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I thought his power was done. Like, is the whole facade of him looking like a muscular man, like is that the only thing that's left? Is it just kind of like fumes of him um changing into a muscular guy, but there's no power behind it? Is that the thing? Is he just like being presented as mostly just like a visual kind of cue now, but there's no muscle or power behind any of that? I don't know. It's kind of a little murky. It's kind of a little confusing. But it does seem like All Might is being kind of like, okay, hey guy, like it's your time to like take your horse and ride off to the sunset. Like it's kind of getting to the point where they don't want him to really be an actual like teacher, because like reasonably every time people will see him, it's like, oh, our sign of peace is gone now. Like our like what are we gonna do? So the second part of this season is them actually qualifying uh for being pros, like to eventually qualify. Like it's really like the final exam of that year or whatever. Like it feels like they're getting close to actually becoming um actual legitimate pros, to actually seem like they're going to actually like shortly after this season seemingly ends, that it seems like they're actually going to start becoming um, that a lot of their stuff is going to be like, okay, work on the road kind of thing, like work like learn how to be more heroes consistently by just having like street experience, which a lot of them already have that, just because all the villains they had to life and death fight throughout this whole entire branch of this and that. But anyways, we ultimately have it to where we have a very much like game approach out of all this thing, where we have to have it to where, like, the breakdown is that they all have to at first go and play this like ultimate game of uh like it's almost like flag football, but it's kind of done much more where you have to like hit somebody with these specific balls to hit them, and um have these targets light up on their bodies. And ultimately, if they get so many different like red balls that they're that ultimately, and it also comes down to the judging of like, okay, well, yeah, like some of them are already out, but we're going to keep them out there just to kind of like as a point system, like look at them and see what kind of decisions they make. Like this entire time, like it seems like there's a whole like game being presented out of all this, but like I think they really take a huge amount of like they take a lot of decisions that people make into consideration, which um I'm just like, okay, so even like the worst hero, like ultimately they could qualify to be a hero if they are just like, if they really pitch in and be much more of a leader, or if they kind of really just uh like save everybody or something like that. Um, like some people are better at this whole thing than others. Um, some people are kind of like some of the words that they say are kind of like more appealing than some other people, because a lot of people say some dumb things. But anyways, we kind of get it to where like even when some people easily kind of beat a lot of people in the first like hitting targets on body round or whatever, and they just kind of easily win. Basically, it all comes down to, okay, like, yeah, we get that you like have now a way better power, and you've learned to like be better than all the other heroes. Great for you, because ultimately a lot of people are like thinking as like, hey, we already know Deku's power. We know it's like an all for one kind of thing. We know how to work that, but nobody knows that he has now switched to not just using his fists, he's using his legs to beat the crap out of people. And like a lot of people like are misjudging this whole class that Deku was in, that All Might taught, because ultimate or All Might and Eraser had taught, because ultimately they had used their powers to do something way different than a lot of people were expecting. So everybody's really severely caught off guard by the adjustments everybody's thinking and making in this hero class, and all the other classes it's like, yeah, hey, look at my cool interesting quirk, but it's just like, yeah, but it's a moot point because these people are just going to outthink you and adjust and figure you out. Even the worst students, most of them are going to pass most of the time, but not everybody from that class all passes, because clearly like some people have attitude problems, and some people have just like the lack of like, yeah, you have to be more than just your ability, just your quirk. You have to be more. So they end up failing. And it's like, well, yeah, clearly I knew this guy was going to fail, because like he's relying too much on his quirk. He's not relying on like he took the entire test and was basically just like, well, yeah, I'm just going to fend for myself, because I'm going to use my quirk, and plus I think my quirk works well without working with others. And that's what basically 100% killed this guy. And like it's like, dude, you're definitely not going to be a hero, because you have to work with others. It's a thing you have to do. um and hopefully he learns that the second time around, that he has to work with people, and he has to adjust his power to make it so that like he can short burst use it, so that way it won't hurt others if they're around him. It's just the thing he has to do. So like the electrical guy, that he figured out a way to adjust his power to have it be much more like a laser pointed range, and this and that. Anyway, so yeah, going into this, like the game where people are doing like chess moves and they think that they're so brilliant and they're such a genius, high level IQ, but there's people that just outquirk people by just going, oh, I like if I were to use this, like I would completely exsolve all my quirk and like we'd be defenseless. So I'm just going to come up with this one weapon. Instead of defensing ourselves, we're going to go on offense and blow people away and just do that. That's our way to work around all this. And um, like that was really smart to ultimately figure out how to kind of outthink this genius intellect or whatever. Like it's smarts going up against smarts and this and that. Eventually, we get to the second round after everybody, most of the people in this class, kind of wins and becomes pro. Quasi pro, so they still have another like wrong to actually legitimately be real super duper licensed pros because they're still on probation bizarrely. So there's so many different levels of becoming a legit pro. But anyway, so it gets to the second competition where ultimately it's that they all have to kind of save all of the civilians. It's like a civilians test. This is kind of where this kind of gets much more into like a Sky High movie where it's like you have to save civilians, but then there's also like some hero that approaches all of them and um, like he becomes like their villain. So everybody's just losing their minds because they're like, oh my god, so not only were we going to have to protect all of these civilians and like protect them and try to like get them all out of here, but now we also have to like go up against this villain as well and we have to win and like and this is this objective is even harder even for some actual legitimate pros to actually like go up against. Like how is this going to be possible for me to do this? There's no way. Um, and so it ends up that again, like these kids figure this out to try to attack this like killer shark looking ash like villain, even though he's a hero, and try to take down all these like little minions. And like again, like it gets to the point where they just like are stubbornly like, I'm not gonna give up. I'm not gonna run away. And we're gonna save all these people, and that's what we're gonna do. To the point to where like the shark ultimately mentions it's like, well, yeah, there was some stuff that like I pulled my punches or I just kind of like I tried to kind of help them out because I'm like, yeah, like they would probably have done the same for other people in the same circumstance, just kind of like, hey, like we'll forgive them or whatever. But then there's sometimes where like he's like, man, I was kind of impressed by one of the freaking kids that freaking tried to hit me and like broke one of the things that I had. It's like, wow, that's kind of crazy. Um, but yeah, eventually they get all their scores, and most of the people end up, uh, of course, becoming heroes in that one class. Everybody else all fails through all, any of the other classes because they were just underestimating and they weren't working hard enough. Even though like a lot of them were just like, oh come on, like I need to be a hero, and it's like, well, so do we. It's like work harder, you stupid jerk. So it ends up that the half hot, half cold freaking hero doesn't make it. He doesn't graduate as to the next level, and neither does the guy that is a moron and a jerk to everybody. And he has to really be freaking just brought down to some kind of level somehow, because nobody is like nobody can take this kid and get this kid and rein him in. Nobody can do anything to this kid to pull him down to their level. No one can. Like Deku has to like really punch some reason into this kid and to just get him to just freaking like just God, this guy just uh. So ultimately, after this whole thing is over, we ultimately have the guy that, of course, explodes, that is kind of bitter about him failing this test, and Deku is just hugely succeeding. He's loved by everybody. Like, everybody just wants to, like, kiss him and make out with him, love him, and ba 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 ba. He's on everybody's, like, number one Magnum cum laude list of just like, oh my god, I want to work with that guy, or I want to see what this guy is like. So it ends up that that Deku and this guy, the guy exploding, really they have to go out and they have to have a grudge match where they had first fought, and he's like, "We are gonna fight. We're gonna do this right now," and like, cause like he is just kind of ticked off that it seems like Deku is keeping secrets from him, and like he's starting to figure things out, and that ultimately like he's putting things together, and he's like why is it that All Might is like losing all of his power, and why is it that all of a sudden you seem to have his same power, and like I think the reason why All Might is now retired because I made him use all of his power up. Like I'm frustrated and I'm gonna explode right now because like I have so much that I didn't tell anybody about. I didn't talk to anybody. I'm like keeping all this rage inside, and now I'm just going to explode right here, right now. Like if he hasn't already exploded numerous times before, now he's gonna like mentally explode with keeping all of this stuff in for so long. And like Deku seems to had been like his friend for so effing long, but it seems the longer and longer and longer that these kids have been um like it seemed to got to the point where they kind of like they had a rift between one another, and eventually like this guy that explodes consistently is just like treating him like crap, and like ultimately this guy he thought he was going to blow through everything and just succeed, but his attitude just won't get him there. And he's just so frustrated why Deku is so like ridiculously overwhelmingly succeeding and this kid isn't, when he didn't have a quirk to be anything. But then all of a sudden this quirk just pops up one day, and this kid has had this quirk seemingly for this whole entire time, and it's just a big rift thing, and they have to both fight it out to the point where eventually All Might comes in and he has to talk to them, and he has to console them, and he's like, yeah, I didn't realize um how my uh how me losing my powers, and how like me pointing to people and telling them it's their turn, um like how that is, like how that affected people, like how that really hurt people, and like how I didn't take the time to console anybody or ask anybody if anybody is like how like damaging this is um for people that now I'm not there for them. Like I'm not like like I'm not really like not only physically there, but now I'm not even going to be there for them mentally when like I actually can be, and this and that. So and for a lot of people, like everybody idolized like All Might and thought that he was going to live forever, and thought that he was going to be like strong forever. And even when Endeavor was like looking at him, was like, hey, you're freaking All Might. Like you should have all the power in the, and you should be really just um you should be like taking this guy down and to eventually see like Endeavor, like once like All Might is snuffed out, like Endeavor is freaking breaking every single one of his like gym equipment, and he's like, I don't want to be number one, not like this. And like it's crazy to kind of see that, where it's like the number two guy is now like looking at being number one, and he's like, I didn't want it this way, like, which is great. But then again, it's also just like, but dude, that's just like you're it now. Like, this could have happened at any moment. And like, yeah, it's not what you wanted, but heck, that's what you have to do now. That's who you are. Like, you're the next All Might for people. And like, I guess he was trying to like, it's like, hey, maybe I'll get there. Maybe I'll get to being like respected like All Might was, but he won't. Like, he just won't. Um, but a lot of people like God, he's so great. Like, he's no All Might. He'll be forever living in All Might's shadow. That's the sad point of it all. Like, it's like, yeah, but he's no All Might. It's like, well, yeah, All Might is not here. All Might's not going to come here because he has no more power. So Endeavor is always going to live in All Might's shadow, but ultimately, it seems like there is going to be a character that is going to quickly and surefire become the next All Might at the very end of this season. So we ultimately have it to where if we haven't done all these like assessments and all this stuff about going on in the season, now we have to have them kind of eventually go into seemingly like the next transitional point of having these kind of like I would call them like work release kind of things where it seems like people are quasi like doing what they did before, where they're like going with certain heroes and kind of learning on the job kind of thing. Um, like, it seems like that's where everybody is transitioning from, and I think there's quite a few ones that I think have really like kind of really earned their stripes via their other kind of contacts they had made previously. Or it seems like everybody's just kind of like, yeah, where am I gonna kind of go? And like, people are telling me, it's like, yeah, I don't really want to do like I don't want to take you on again. Like, hey, like especially the kid that's like Deku that goes to his like last person that is his like was his kind of like guy to go to, and he's like, no, like just call All Might. I'm sure All Might can like contact you with somebody. But it seems like he's gonna end up somewhere because ultimately you have these kids called the Big Three, but you only got to see one of the kids actually use his power. There's two other kids where you didn't get to see what they do, what their power is. I'm assuming that's probably what other episodes are for, to see these kids in action and just understand, like, okay, why is this one kid consistently like having his head to a wall? What does he do? What is his power? Like, I don't get why this kid is absurdly shy. But I think every single one of these heroes are all realistically, once they start talking or once they start like befuddling or once they start like doing things that don't make sense, all of that is all to kind of make you think that these characters are a less than. Like, God, are these people like, they're not really thinking about what they're saying. They're not really like, man, they look like buffoons. Like, what's going on with these characters? It doesn't make sense to like, but that's their they're supposed to look goofy. They're supposed to look goofy to freaking distract people. Like, their powers are to distract people, to make them think that um they're not good at what they do, or they're not like, everything that they do is a distraction. So we have these kids that are supposedly the big three. We ultimately have a kid that can seemingly do like a kind of almost Kitty Pride like thing that can kind of phase in and out and then punch people or kick people or whatever. And supposedly this kid is supposedly so good at what he does that supposedly he could become like the next All Might. This blonde haired kid that looked like, I'm like, okay, so this, like, I'm not quite understanding exactly how this guy, who, like, at first you see him, like, like he's consistently naked because like with him trying to consistently try to keep his clothes on while phasing in and out because even he's losing his clothes while he phases in and out. So he's basically just beating an entire class of students while being bare butt naked a lot of the times. And he's like, yeah, a lot of the times I try to hold my wang, but or so no one can see it, but maybe you probably got a peekaboo or whatever of it. Sorry, it's like, yeah, it's just, it happens. Um, I hope they eventually probably figure out how to like get him some kind of clothes that works with his quirk. I don't know, but hopefully they mathematically figure that out. Unless they want this guy to consistently just pop people in the face or whatever and have him be naked consistently and this and that. Which I guess would be still be funny, but I don't know. So we ultimately have the other two kids that are ultimately talking about work release programs or whatever. But they're just kind of like they're overly chatty, or one kid is just like leaning his head up against the wall, and that's all he does. Like he barely watches what anybody's doing. He kind of tells people some stuff here and there, but like you're like, I want to know about the other two people that like. Okay, I know this is like the phasing kid is like the lovable goof, and but what are the other two people? Like you have the chatty Kathy, and then you have the other guy that is otherwise like this very emo looking kid that doesn't want to talk to people. What do they do? Like, what is their power? Like, is their power to like? Is the girl that overly chats is she super chatty just because like her power is speed? Maybe, like maybe that's her thing, and maybe the other kid has some kind of like bizarrish like supernatural character or supernatural power. I don't know. But I'm kind of intrigued about who these other characters are. Just besides the whole like phasing thing, I'm like, how exactly is this phasing thing going to like how is this phasing thing going to exactly work? Like, I just don't quite understand how this phasing power is going to work for a big, like, like, a big, like, being or a big, strong, like, I don't see this character being overly, like, he not only would have to have, like, kitty pride power, but then he would have to be, like, the most muscular, like, overly super humanly strong character. Like it's got to be more than just um it's got to be more than just like facing through things, because ultimately this guy can trick people and this and that, trick people and ultimately kind of phase in a different way to ultimately where he'll get his punches in. But what happens if he were to ever really have um like a big giant rage monster come in and appear? Like, what is he really going to do with that? Like, if he has like a very much like he doesn't have a quirk to really like take down a big dragon-esh like monster, something like that. Like he doesn't have the ability to take that kind of thing down. But I'd like to see him try. That's the whole thing. Um, but anyways, uh, we also have them kind of potentially like saying that these kids are interested in the one kid that adjusted to the guy that has like the kitty pride power, like the phasing power. Ultimately, there was one kid that actually adjusted to this guy's power, even though realistically it just didn't quite work out still. Even though he was the only one that actually adjusted, everybody else was just trying to again, as per usual, like fight their way through this, and of course it wasn't going to work out. But there's one kid that was I guess you can call him the troublemaker, because that's what they called him, the troublemaker, because he got freaking in trouble for fighting, and so. Anyways, yeah, it just ended up that like these kids were like, oh yeah, like these kids actually do have some potential, but like it's kind of like left it open ended to just be like, okay, eventually they're going to end up somewhere, but who knows where. So Anyways, yeah, I am gonna leave it at that because ultimately I might have to fuse some tapes and stuff together. This is probably gonna be a long video, so I'm gonna go. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.